What if everything you've been taught about capitalism is just completely wrong? Like, what if the ultimate goal of a successful business isn't to beat the competition, but to actually destroy the very concept of competition altogether?
I mean, it is a deeply uncomfortable thought, right? Because we are essentially raised to worship at the altar of the free market.
Yeah, exactly.
We're taught to believe that competing fiercely is the ultimate engine of human progress. But when you actually look at the mechanics of how the future is built, well, the reality is entirely different.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you are that curious learner listening right now, the person who really wants to understand the hidden architecture of success, but maybe you don't want to read a massive mountain of business theory, this is exactly where you need to be.
Right, we are basically tearing up that reliable, step-by-step blueprint today.
You know the one I'm talking about. The whole go to a good school, find a proven business model, work really hard, and then society just hands you a gold star. Today, we're exploring a philosophical framework for creating entirely new things based on the insights from Zero to One by Peter Thiel and Blake Masters. We're looking at what it actually takes to build the future from scratch.
And honestly, the stakes couldn't be higher here. This isn't just some list of, 5 habits of highly effective CEOs.
Right, no cold plunges today.
Exactly. It's a fundamental rewiring of how you view progress.
Yeah.
It requires us to abandon the safety of just copying what already works. It forces us to look right into the void of the unknown.
So let's just jump right in. The foundation of this entire worldview. It starts with an interview question. And it sounds like a totally simple icebreaker, but it's actually designed to make your brain just stall out.
It really is.
The question is, what important truth do very few people agree with you on?
It is arguably the ultimate contrarian test. And I have to say, it is incredibly difficult to answer, honestly.
See, let me push back on that right away, because my initial instinct is just to say, well, that's not so hard. People argue literally all the time.
They do.
Like you could say, I think our educational system is totally broken, or I don't believe in God, or I think universal basic income is a terrible idea. I mean, those are strong opinions that will definitely start a massive fight at a dinner party.
Well, yeah, they will definitely start a fight. But they aren't actually contrarian truths. Those are just sides in very familiar, highly populated debates.
Oh, I see.
If you say the education system is broken, you are instantly joining a massive club of millions of people who loudly agree with you. A true contrarian truth looks more like most people believe in X, but the truth is actually the exact opposite of X.
Which requires serious intellectual independence, which is hard enough on its own.
Exactly. But it also requires immense psychological courage. Think about it. From the time we enter kindergarten, our education system is fundamentally about consensus.
Yeah, you're rewarded for providing the agreed-upon answer.
Right. To genuinely hold a contrarian truth means you have to be willing to look socially awkward, or foolish, or even slightly unhinged to your peers. Brilliant thinking is incredibly rare, but pure courage is in even shorter supply.
Okay, so if we take this framework and apply it to the grand arc of human history, we get this fascinating contrarian truth about progress itself, because we generally assume progress is this uniform forward march.
But there are actually two completely different paths of progress. The first path is horizontal progress, which is also known as extensive progress.
And that simply means copying things that already work, right?
Yes, you're going from 1 to n. It's easy to visualize because the blueprint already exists. If you have a typewriter and you build 100 more typewriters, well, you have made horizontal progress.
Right, and the single word for horizontal progress on a global scale is globalization. Taking an idea, a product, or a standard of living that works in one place and spreading it everywhere else.
Exactly. Now, the second path is vertical progress or intensive progress.
Yeah.
This means doing something genuinely new. You're going from 0 to 1.
So taking that typewriter and inventing a digital word processor.
Right. You haven't just multiplied what existed. You've created an entirely new paradigm. The single word for vertical progress is technology.
And here is where the contrarian truth really hits. Most people today look at the world and believe that globalization is the defining narrative of our future, the whole flattening of the world concept.
But the reality is that technology matters much, much more. In fact, if you really look at the physics and economics of it, globalization without new technology is literally a recipe for a global apocalypse.
The math on this is brutally unforgiving. Let's look at China. For the last few decades, China has executed a massive, highly successful 20-year plan to straightforwardly copy everything that worked in the developed world.
They copied 19th century railroads, 20th century air conditioning, and modern city layouts.
They might have skipped a few intermediate steps, like going straight to wireless networks instead of laying copper landlines across the whole country, but the core mechanism was still just copying.
Right, going from one to N.
But here's where the math gets absolutely terrifying. Think about trying to feed an exponentially growing family. If you don't invent a new, higher yield crop, which would be vertical progress, your only option is horizontal progress.
Which is just watering down the exact same pot of soup so it stretches further.
Exactly. And eventually, everyone starves. If China doubles its energy production over the next 2 decades using only today's tools, it will also double its air pollution.
Or look at India. If hundreds of millions of Indian households were to suddenly adopt the exact consumption habits and lifestyle of an American household, using only the technology we have right now, the result would be an absolute environmental catastrophe.
The Earth's carrying capacity simply cannot handle it.
It can't. Spreading old ways of creating wealth around the world doesn't result in global riches. It results in devastating resource depletion. In a world of strictly limited resources, horizontal progress eventually hits a concrete wall.
Man, this totally reframes how we use the word developed. When we call America or Western Europe the developed world, it implies we've reached the end of history.
Like we've crossed the finish line.
Right. And now the developing nations just need to catch up to our perfect state. But if we view things through a 0 to 1 lens, we have to admit that we are actually vastly underdeveloped.
We really are. We don't have energy too cheap to meter. We aren't vacationing on the moon. We don't have supersonic commercial flights anymore.
The generation of the 1950s and 60s fully expected relentless vertical progress to continue. Because for about 200 years, from the invention of the steam engine up through the Apollo program, it actually did.
But today, our incredibly sleek smartphones act as a glowing distraction from the fact that our physical surroundings are strangely old. Our transportation, our energy grids, our physical infrastructure. Very little of it has fundamentally changed since the 1970s.
Only computers and communications have experienced true 0 to 1 leaps, which raises the massive glaring question, why? Why did we stop taking those vertical leaps in the physical world?
To understand that, we have to do a bit of psychological archaeology. We have to examine the profound trauma left by the late 1990s.
Right. The dot-com crash of 2000 is the invisible ghost-haunting modern business. It is impossible to overstate how deeply that crash rewired the brains of investors, entrepreneurs, and the general public.
But to truly understand why the crash happened and why the reaction was so severe, you really have to understand the macroeconomic desperation of the decade that preceded it.
We tend to look back at the 1990s with this warm, fuzzy nostalgia. We think of it as this prosperous, cheerful, end-of-history decade. But the early 90s were actually defined by deep malaise.
Yes, the Berlin Wall came down in '89, but by mid-1990, the United States was in a stubborn recession. Manufacturing wasn't rebounding.
There was intense visceral anxiety about working-class jobs flowing to Mexico under NAFTA, which is exactly why an independent candidate like Ross Perot managed to capture nearly 20% of the popular vote in 1992.
The cultural mood was dark. I mean, it was the era of grunge music, of Nirvana. You had images of dead American soldiers being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu on cable news.
Even Silicon Valley felt like it was losing its edge. Japan seemed perfectly poised to permanently win the semiconductor war. There was no sense of triumphant optimism.
And then suddenly, a spark in the dark. The internet arrived in the public consciousness.
The Mosaic browser was officially released in late 1993, which eventually evolved into Netscape, and the adoption rate was violently fast.
Netscape's Navigator browser went from 20% of the market to almost 80% in less than a year. When they went public in August 1995, they weren't even profitable, yet their stock shot from $28 to $174 in 5 months.
Companies like Yahoo and Amazon followed suit. But the real mania, the sheer, unadulterated insanity that we associate with the dot-com bubble, was actually a highly concentrated 18-month window from roughly September 1998 to March 2000.
And the backdrop to that specific 18-month window wasn't just greed, it was sheer panic.
This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. In 1997, the East Asian financial crises hit Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea. Their economies went into a tailspin.
Then, in August 1998, the Russian ruble crisis happened. Russia defaulted on its debt. Think about how terrifying that was for global investors. You had a massive country with 10,000 nuclear weapons and literally no money to pay its military or run its government.
That Russian default triggered a domino effect that brought down long-term capital management, which was a massive U.S. hedge fund run by Nobel laureates.
They lost $4.6 billion in a matter of months. They required a massive bailout coordinated by the Federal Reserve just to prevent a systemic collapse of the U.S. financial system. Even the euro, which launched in early 1999, immediately started sinking in value.
So, if you are an investor with capital in 1998, where do you put it? The old economy is failing globally, manufacturing is dead, emerging markets are collapsing.
The new economy of the internet felt like the only possible lifeboat. It was a conclusion reached by indirect proof. Since everything else was failing, the internet just had to work.
And so the floodgates opened. Money poured into Silicon Valley at a rate that defied all logic. People were decamping from safe, prestigious jobs in finance or law to join startups that had literally no path to profitability.
In fact, many had anti-business models where the faster they grew, the more money they lost.
There is this wild anecdote from 1999 about a 40-something graduate student who was running 6 different companies at the exact same time. Now, in any normal era, a 40-something grad student is usually considered a bit lost.
Right, running 6 companies at once is considered pure delusion.
Exactly. But in 1999, people looked at that and thought, wow, what a dynamic portfolio of synergy. We should definitely invest. It was mass hysteria.
Even companies that eventually became legendary, like PayPal, were caught in this vortex. In late 1999, PayPal's original product was software that let you beam money from one Palm Pilot to another.
Which was a total flop. Journalists literally voted it one of the 10 worst business ideas of the year.
So the founders pivoted to email payments. The tech worked, but they faced a classic network effect problem. They needed millions of users instantly to make the system valuable, but advertising was too expensive and deals with big banks kept falling through.
So they resorted to a strategy that sounds like absolute madness today. They just paid people.
Literally handed out money.
They gave you $10 for joining and another $10 for every friend you referred.
Yeah.
It worked brilliantly. They experienced exponential growth. But exponential growth meant exponentially growing costs. They were burning millions of dollars in cash every single month.
But the founders knew the bubble was going to pop. They could feel the irrational exuberance. So they used those vanity metrics, the massive user growth, to raise an enormous round of funding before the music stopped.
In February 2000, the Wall Street Journal ran a glowing profile suggesting PayPal might be worth $500 million. The founders took that exact newspaper article and used it to raise $100 million in a matter of weeks.
And the frenzy of the investors was staggering. A South Korean investment firm wired PayPal $5 million without negotiating a deal, without doing due diligence, and without signing a single legal document.
The founders actually tried to return the money, but the Korean firm wouldn't even tell them where to send it. They managed to close that $100 million round in March 2000, and almost immediately after the check cleared, the bubble popped.
The Nasdaq peaked at 5,048 in mid-March and then completely cratered, wiping out trillions of dollars in wealth.
The hangover from that party was brutal. The entrepreneurs and investors who survived the crash were deeply traumatized. They looked at the wreckage and collectively decided that the hubris of the 90s was the ultimate enemy.
To ensure it never happened again, the business world internalized 4 major dogmas. 4 lessons that they still treat as absolute gospel today.
Let's walk through these dogmas because they are exactly what you are taught if you go to business school right now. Dogma number 1, make incremental advances.
Because grand visions inflated the bubble, anyone with a grand vision is now treated with intense suspicion. Small, safe, measurable steps are the only acceptable way forward.
Dogma number 2, stay lean and flexible. In modern business parlance, lean is essentially code for unplanned.
You shouldn't presume to know what your business will actually do. You should just build a minimum viable product, throw it into the market, and iterate agnostically based on data.
Dogma number 3, improve on the competition. Don't be so arrogant as to try and create a totally new market from scratch.
Start with an existing, proven market, see what the successful companies are doing, and just build a slightly better, slightly cheaper product.
And dogma number 4, focus on product, not sales. The trauma of the 90s taught people that if you need slick salespeople or massive advertising campaigns to sell your product, the product itself must be inherently worthless.
The only pure sustainable growth is viral growth driven by the absolute quality of the engineering.
It's like we touched a hot stove in the 90s, and instead of deciding, hey, maybe I should just use an oven mitt next time, we concluded, cooking is fundamentally dangerous. I will never turn on an oven again.
We massively overcorrected.
We really did. Yes, the 90s were full of hubris and terrible execution, but the peak of the market was also a peak of clarity. For a brief moment, people looked far into the future, recognized that we needed massive technological leaps, and judged themselves capable of actually building it.
We abandoned that ambition because of financial trauma.
And that realization leads us directly to the most provocative argument we are covering today. The contrarian truth is that the exact opposite of those four dogmas is actually correct.
Boldness is far better than triviality. A bad plan is infinitely better than no plan. Sales matter just as much as the product, and perhaps most controversially, competitive markets destroy profits.
Okay, stop right there. Competitive markets destroy profits. This flies in the face of everything we are taught. I want to spend real time on this because it challenges the very definition of capitalism.
It does.
Economics 101 teaches us that perfect competition is the ideal state of the market. It drives innovation, it lowers prices for consumers, and makes everything efficient. How can competition be the enemy?
To understand this, we have to recognize the stark difference between creating value for the world and actually capturing that value for your business. You can create a staggering amount of value for humanity and still be a fundamentally terrible business.
The unit economics of the airline industry perfectly illustrate this. Think about U.S. airline companies. They create hundreds of billions of dollars of immense value.
They perform daily miracles, moving millions of people across oceans at nearly the speed of sound safely.
But let's look at the financial reality. In 2012, when the average domestic airfare was $178, how much profit do you think the airlines actually made per passenger trip?
37 cents.
37 cents. That is breathtakingly terrible. Now compare that to Google. Google brought in far less overall revenue, about $50 billion compared to the airline's $160 billion.
But Google kept 21% of those revenues as pure profit. That is more than 100 times the profit margin of the airline industry. Consequently, Google is worth multiple times more than every U.S. airline combined.
And the reason for this discrepancy is market structure. The airlines are trapped in what economists call perfect competition.
In perfect competition, all the firms sell relatively homogeneous products. A seat on Delta is largely interchangeable with a seat on United.
Because the products are interchangeable, no single firm has market power. Prices are dictated entirely by the market. If there's any profit to be made, new firms rush in, increase the supply of seats, and drive prices and profits right back down to zero.
It is a bloodbath of margin compression. But the opposite of perfect competition is monopoly. A monopoly owns its market entirely. Because there is no substitute for what they do, they can set their own prices. They can produce at the exact quantity and price point that maximizes their profits.
Now, we must clarify the terminology. When we talk about a monopoly here, we are not talking about illegal bullies, corrupt cronyism, or government-licensed monopolies that extract rent without innovating.
We are defining a monopoly as a company that is so good at what it does that no other firm in the world can offer a close substitute. Google went from 0 to 1 in search in the late 90s, distancing itself so far from competitors like Yahoo and Microsoft that it hasn't truly had to compete in search for over 2 decades.
But no one admits they are a monopoly, and no one admits they are trapped in perfect competition. Everyone lies. The monopolists lie to protect themselves.
They are terrified of the Department of Justice slapping them with an antitrust lawsuit, so they frame themselves as tiny, vulnerable players in a massively defined market.
Exactly. Google will never say we own a dominant percentage of global search. Instead, they will define their market as broadly as possible. They will say we own a tiny fraction of the global advertising market, or we are just a small piece of the global consumer technology market, facing fierce daily competition from giants like Apple, Amazon, and Meta.
And companies trapped in perfect competition tell the exact opposite lie. They are desperate to attract investors, so they define their market incredibly narrowly to make it look like they dominate it by default.
Think about starting a restaurant in Palo Alto. If I pitch investors, I might say, we have a total monopoly. We are the only restaurant serving British food in Palo Alto. We own the entire market.
But that is a fatal intersectional delusion. You are creating a fake market by intersecting smaller categories.
Right. I'm acting like I'm only competing against imaginary British restaurants. But in reality, I'm competing against all restaurants in Palo Alto, and probably restaurants in Mountain View and Menlo Park, too. When people are deciding where to eat, they don't say, well, I must have British food tonight. They just want a good meal.
You see the same delusion in creative industries, like Hollywood startups. A screenwriter will pitch a movie by combining wildly disparate elements. It's a movie starring Jay-Z and a cross between The Matrix and Jaws.
The rap star joins an elite crew of hackers to catch the great white shark that killed his mentor. It's totally unique.
It is entirely unique. No one has ever done it. But just because a product sits at the novel intersection of rap, hacking, and sharks does not mean there's an actual market of human beings willing to pay money to watch it.
Defining your market so narrowly that you are the only player is a comforting lie that masks the brutal reality of competition.
So we arrive at this incredible paradigm shift. Capitalism and competition are actually opposites. Capitalism is premised on the accumulation of capital. Perfect competition destroys capital because all profits are competed away just to survive.
If you want to create and capture lasting value, you have to escape competition. You have to build a monopoly.
Which brings us to the operational reality. If we accept that monopoly is the ultimate goal, how do we actually build one without getting crushed by massive incumbents? What is the architecture of a monopoly?
The first thing we need to understand is how technology companies are actually valued. This completely blew my mind because it explains why the stock market often seems completely disconnected from reality.
The value of any business is the sum of all the money it will make in the future, discounted to its present value. For old economy companies in slow-growth markets, like a newspaper or a restaurant, most of their value is in the near term.
They might hold their value for a few years, but eventually competition or technological shifts will erode their cash flows.
But tech companies are the exact opposite. They often lose money for the first 5 to 10 years because they are aggressively building their monopoly infrastructure.
When the founders of PayPal looked at their numbers in March 2001, they were burning cash. But when they projected their growth out into the future, they realized that 75% of the company's present value would actually come from profits generated in the year 2011 and beyond.
You see the exact same math with LinkedIn. In 2012, LinkedIn had less than $1 billion in revenue and a tiny net income. To a traditional value investor, they looked horribly overpriced.
Yet their market cap was nearly $25 billion. It looks insane until you realize that investors were pricing in massive monopolistic cash flows stretching decades into the future.
But to generate cash flows decades into the future, your business has to actually survive that long. You have to endure. And this is where the 4 pillars of a monopoly come in. To endure, a company needs proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and branding.
Let's really break these down, starting with proprietary technology. What makes tech actually proprietary?
The golden rule for proprietary technology is the 10x rule. Your technology must be at least 10 times better than its closest substitute.
If you build something that is only 20% better, it is merely a marginal improvement.
In the real world, consumers are lazy, switching costs are high, and entrenched habits are hard to break. A 20% improvement won't convince anyone to change their behavior.
You can achieve a 10x improvement in 2 ways. You can invent something entirely new, like a guaranteed cure for baldness. Since there is currently no cure, going from 0 to 1 is technically an infinite improvement.
Or you can radically improve an existing solution. When Amazon started, physical bookstores could only stock perhaps 100,000 titles. Because Amazon didn't have to maintain physical retail space, they could offer over 1 million titles. They were 10x better on inventory.
The second pillar is network effects. A product becomes more useful as more people use it. A telephone is useless if you are the only person in the world who owns one.
But the paradox of network effects is that they are incredibly difficult to start. To build a global network, you actually have to start with an extremely small, highly concentrated market.
This is exactly what Mark Zuckerberg did. He didn't launch Facebook and immediately try to sign up the entire population of Earth. He launched it exclusively for the students of Harvard University.
Once he achieved a monopoly at Harvard, he expanded to other Ivy League schools, then all colleges, and finally the world. You have to capture a tiny ecosystem before you can capture a larger one.
The third pillar is economies of scale. A monopoly gets stronger as it gets bigger because the fixed costs of creating the product are spread over a larger quantity of sales.
This is why software monopolies are so incredibly profitable compared to hardware or physical services.
Let's look at the unit economics of that. If I run a bakery and I want to double my sales, I have to buy twice as much flour, twice as much sugar, hire another baker, and maybe rent a larger kitchen. My costs scale almost linearly with my revenue.
But if I write a piece of software, The massive fixed cost is the engineering time required to write the code. Once the code is written, the marginal cost of producing one more copy of that software and sending it over the internet is virtually zero.
Whether I sell 10 copies or 10 million copies, my fixed costs remain the same, which means the profit margin approaches 100% at scale.
Finally, the fourth pillar is branding. Apple is the paramount example. The minimalist design, the tightly controlled store experience, the premium pricing, the cultural halo effect of Steve Jobs. All of it creates a brand monopoly that is incredibly difficult to replicate.
But the danger is that many startups try to build the brand first without the underlying proprietary technology or scale. Branding without substance is a mirage.
So we have the four pillars. But knowing the architecture isn't enough. You have to know the sequence of construction. You don't just build a massive monopoly on day one. You have to start small and monopolize.
And I love the analogy here. It's exactly like playing the board game Risk.
It is the perfect analogy. If you play Risk and immediately spread your armies thinly across the entire global board, you will be wiped out by your opponents on the first turn. You have no defensible borders.
Instead, what does any good Risk player do? You take Australia. You secure a small, highly defensible territory with only one entry point. You build up your forces there.
You hold it tightly, establishing an absolute monopoly over that continent, and then you slowly, methodically expand into Asia.
Jeff Bezos taking Australia is one of the greatest business strategies in history. His ultimate vision for Amazon was to be the everything store. But he didn't start by selling everything.
He deliberately chose to sell only books. Books were easy to ship, they were relatively uniform in size, and they appealed to a specific demographic of enthusiast consumers. He took the book market, established his monopoly, and then slowly expanded into CDs, DVDs, and eventually everything else.
And a crucial part of taking Australia is avoiding the temptation to disrupt massive incumbents. Disruption is such a toxic buzzword right now. Everyone wants to be a disruptor.
But if you call yourself a disruptor, you are picking a fight. You are stepping into the ring with entrenched giants who have more money and more lawyers than you do.
You don't want to be the first mover who gets bloodied in battle. You want to be the last mover. You want to make the final definitive 0-to-1 leap in a specific market and then enjoy decades of monopoly profits.
But here is where we hit a massive cultural roadblock. Taking Australia, building a 10x proprietary technology, projecting cash flows a decade into the future. All of this requires a massive amount of deliberate long-term planning.
And our modern society has largely abandoned the very concept of long-term planning. Which brings us to a profound philosophical shift. We have to talk about how we view the future and why you cannot treat your life or your business like a lottery ticket.
How you act in the present is entirely determined by how you view the future. We can map this on a matrix with two axes. The first axis is optimism versus pessimism. Do you think the future will be better or worse than the present?
The second axis is definite versus indefinite. Do you believe the future is something you can specifically design and control, or do you view it as a random, hazy fog of probability?
So let's look at the four quadrants. A definite pessimist believes the future will be terrible, but they know exactly why it will be terrible, so they prepare for it.
An indefinite pessimist believes the future will be terrible, but they have no idea why, so they just kind of wallow in reactive anxiety.
But the truly consequential shift in American history occurred between the optimistic quadrants. From the 17th century through the 1950s and 60s, the Western world was guided by definite optimism.
People believed the future would be radically better than the present, and they believed it was their responsibility to design, engineer, and build that specific future.
This is the mindset that dug the Panama Canal. It's the mindset that built the Golden Gate Bridge ahead of schedule and under budget during the Great Depression.
It's the mindset of the Apollo program. The sheer audacity of John F. Kennedy saying, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade." He didn't say, "We'll iterate on aerospace concepts and see where the market leads us." He set a definite, insanely ambitious plan.
We even see this back in the 1660s with scientists like Robert Boyle, who literally puts the recovery of youth and life extension on his to-do list.
But starting around 1982, after the economic shocks of the 1970s, America shifted into a new paradigm: indefinite optimism.
To an indefinite optimist, the future will undoubtedly be better. The stock market will always go up, technology will magically improve, but they have absolutely no idea how exactly it will happen. So they refuse to make any specific plans. They just expect to profit from the general upward trend.
And this indefinite mindset has infected absolutely every corner of our culture. It explains the financialization of the modern world. Instead of engineers designing underwater cities or nuclear fusion reactors, our smartest graduates become bankers.
And what do bankers do? They don't build new physical things. They make money by rearranging the capital structures of already existing companies.
Or they become corporate lawyers, getting rich by resolving disputes over old things. Or they become management consultants, extracting tiny procedural optimizations out of legacy businesses.
The macroeconomic loop of indefinite optimism is actually quite tragic. Think about how capital moves today. The founders of a successful company sell their business. They now have a massive pile of money. But because they are indefinite optimists, they don't have a grand vision for a new project. So they give the money to a large bank.
Right. And the bank executives don't know what new technologies to build either, so they spread the money across a portfolio of institutional funds.
And the institutional funds don't know how to build the future, so they just buy a diversified portfolio of stocks in existing companies. Those companies generate revenue, issue dividends back to the investors, and the cycle repeats.
Billions of dollars slosh around the global financial system, changing hands, generating fees from middlemen, but nobody actually knows what to build with the capital in the real economy. Money has become the ultimate end itself, rather than a specific means to an end.
Think about how this impacts your own life, your own career. Think about your LinkedIn profile right now. We train our children to be indefinite optimists from middle school.
We tell them to hoard extracurricular activities, play the oboe, join the debate team, volunteer at the animal shelter. In high school, they exhaust themselves trying to appear omnicompetent.
By the time they arrive at college, they've spent a decade curating this bewilderingly diverse, multi-track resume. They are meticulously preparing for everything, which means they are actually ready for absolutely nothing in particular. It's the ultimate religion of keeping your options open.
This indefinite thinking has even invaded the startup ecosystem via pseudo-Darwinian metaphors. We hear constant praise for lean startups and agile iteration.
Entrepreneurs are explicitly told not to write a long-term business plan. They are told to release a minimum viable product, listen to focus group feedback, and slowly adapt to the environment like an organism evolving in a primordial soup.
But the flaw in that thinking is massive. Darwinian evolution might perfectly explain the origin of trilobites over millions of years, but it is a terrible framework for building a revolutionary business in a few years.
Iterating blindly based on customer feedback only helps you find the local maximum, the best version of what already exists. It will never help you find the global maximum, something entirely new.
Exactly. Focus groups can tell you how to improve a CD player by 10%. They cannot tell you to invent the iPod.
When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he didn't use focus groups. He operated as a definite optimist. He had a concrete multi-year plan for a post-PC world where multiple devices would seamlessly integrate.
When the iPod launched in 2001, financial analysts literally laughed at it. They called it a nice feature for Macintosh users. They couldn't see the grand design because they viewed the future as a random walk. Intelligent design works best in startups.
So, if you want to reject the tyranny of chance, if you want to stop treating your life like a lottery ticket where you just build a diversified resume and hope you get lucky, you have to make a definite plan.
But to make a plan that actually matters, you can't base it on common knowledge. You have to base it on something the rest of the world hasn't seen yet. You have to go hunting for a secret.
The concept of secrets is perhaps the most romantic and vital idea we're exploring today. To frame this, we can look at an incredibly unlikely source, the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski.
Wait, we are taking business advice from the Unabomber. Let me stop you there because that is quite the pivot.
We aren't taking his advice, but we are analyzing his diagnosis of society's psychological state. In his manifesto, Kaczynski outlined a trichotomy of human goals. He argued that there are three types of goals in life.
Group 1, goals that are easy to achieve with minimal effort. Group 2, goals that are hard to achieve but doable with intense effort. And Group 3, goals that are impossible to achieve no matter how hard you try.
Okay, easy, hard, and impossible. That tracks.
Right.
Kaczynski believed that modern society is deeply depressed because the Industrial Revolution essentially solved all the hard problems. We conquered nature, we mapped the globe, we built the machines.
Therefore, modern humans are left only with goals that are either trivially easy or utterly impossible. Because the fulfilling, hard but doable tasks are gone, we feel alienated. His insane, murderous solution was to violently destroy all technology so we could start over and have hard problems to solve again.
But the tragedy is that while his solution was monstrous, Many perfectly sane, highly educated people subconsciously agree with his underlying premise. We walk around acting as if there are no secrets left to discover.
We assume the map of human knowledge is completely filled in. Physics has reached the dead end of string theory, the continents are all mapped on Google Earth, and the financial markets are perfectly efficient.
We assume that if a good idea existed, someone smarter with more funding would have already done it. And there are four distinct societal trends that enforce this anti-secret mindset.
First is the incrementalism taught in our schools. Second is risk aversion. People are terrified of being wrong and looking foolish.
Third is complacency. The elites are comfortable and don't feel the desperate need to search for radical new truths. And fourth is the dogmatic belief in perfectly efficient markets.
But the reality is that the world is still full of secrets. It's like realizing the world isn't a fully mapped video game where every corner has a walkthrough on YouTube. There are still hidden levels. Look at Airbnb.
For decades, people thought the hospitality market was solved. You build big hotels in commercial zones. That was the consensus.
But Airbnb founders discovered a secret hidden in plain sight. There was a massive, untapped supply of real estate sitting empty every night in people's spare bedrooms.
Or look at Uber and Lyft. The consensus was that public transit and regulated taxi medallions were the only way to move people around a city. But they saw a massive parallel transportation network that no one else saw, simply disguised as ordinary people driving their own cars.
Those are secrets. They are hard to see, but perfectly doable once you recognize them. And finding these secrets isn't just a fun intellectual exercise. It is a financial imperative because of the underlying mathematical reality of the universe, the power law.
The power law is the most misunderstood concept in business. In venture capital, investors try to profit from the exponential growth of early-stage companies. Now, most startups fail, and those investments go to zero.
But the ones that succeed, the true 0-to-1 monopolies, attain exponentially greater value than all the others combined.
The biggest secret in venture capital is that the single best investment in a successful fund will equal or outperform the entire rest of the fund combined.
But hold on, I need to challenge this from the perspective of an individual managing their own career. If the power law is absolute, if only a tiny handful of companies capture all the value, isn't it incredibly reckless not to diversify?
That is exactly the illusion that our institutions drill into us.
If I bet my entire career on one secret and I'm wrong, I'm ruined. Shouldn't I keep my options open?
Schools teach us homogenized knowledge. In high school, every subject gets exactly 45 minutes of your time, regardless of its importance or your aptitude for it. You diversify your effort. But your life is not a mutual fund.
An entrepreneur cannot diversify herself. You cannot start 12 different companies at the exact same time and hope one of them hits the jackpot. You have to commit to one vision.
Ah, I see. So applying the power law to your career means recognizing that the differences between companies dwarf the differences in roles.
It might actually be a massive mistake to start your own undifferentiated company just so you can print business cards that say founder and CEO.
Yeah,
Because owning 100% of a failed 110 startup is worth exactly zero.
precisely. If you are incredibly talented, but you don't have a 0-to-1 secret of your own, the most rational, power law optimized decision you can make is to find a company that is fanatically right about a secret and join them.
Owning 0.01% of the next Google is infinitely more valuable than owning 100% of a company that fundamentally doesn't matter. You have to follow the money, recognize the exponential curve, and commit to the right vessel.
And that brings us to the actual construction of that vessel. You've rejected the dogmas of the 90s. You understand the architecture of a monopoly. You've rejected the lottery ticket mindset and found a definite secret.
Now you have to lay the foundation, and the initial setup of an organization is a matter of life and death.
There's a rule in Silicon Valley known as Thiel's law. A startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed.
It's like the Big Bang. Physicists tell us that in the first few microseconds of the universe, the very laws of physics were malleable. They were forged in that initial explosion and then locked in forever.
A startup is exactly the same. Beginnings are special. If you choose the wrong co-founder, it's as emotionally and legally destructive as a messy divorce. And the company is always the casualty.
To ensure the foundation doesn't crack under pressure, you have to achieve perfect structural alignment. There are three crucial concepts that must be balanced: ownership, possession, and control.
Ownership refers to who legally owns the equity, usually the founders, the early employees, and the investors. Possession refers to who runs the company day to day, the managers and the employees. And control refers to who governs the ultimate affairs of the company, the board of directors.
In a giant public company like General Motors, these three things are totally fractured. But in a startup, conflicts usually erupt along a very specific fault line, the tension between ownership and control, specifically the founders versus the investors on the board.
The investors might want to take the company public quickly to score a massive short-term win for their venture fund. But the founders might want to stay private, suffer short-term losses, and grow the long-term monopoly.
To manage this inherent friction, the rules must be incredibly strict. First, keep the board of directors extremely small. A board of 3 is ideal. A board of 5 is manageable.
Anything larger than that becomes a bureaucratic parliament that cannot make swift, decisive actions. Second, everyone involved must be on the bus full-time. You cannot have part-time consultants or remote workers dialing it in.
Misalignment creeps in the moment people are not physically together, sweating through the same daily crises. And then there is a very specific, almost counterintuitive rule about cash compensation.
A venture-backed company does better the less it pays its CEO. The absolute cap for an early-stage CEO salary should be $150,000 a year.
Which sounds low for someone running a multi-million-dollar operation in an expensive city.
Right. If I'm the CEO, I might say, look, I have a huge mortgage in San Francisco. I have kids in private school. I need $400,000 a year just to survive. Why is paying them a high cash salary so toxic? Because high cash compensation changes the psychology of the leader. It turns a visionary founder into a corporate politician. If you are making $400,000 a year in cash, your primary subconscious motivation becomes protecting that salary.
You become incentivized to defend the status quo, hide structural problems from the board, and avoid existential risks.
But a cash-poor executive is hungry. Their only path to wealth is to drastically increase the overall equity value of the company. It perfectly aligns their personal incentives with the long-term health of the monopoly.
Equity is the glue that binds the foundation. But creating a legendary startup requires more than just perfectly aligned legal documents and restricted stock units. It requires building a culture that borders on the fanatical. In Silicon Valley, they call it building a mafia.
The PayPal mafia is the most famous example of this. The sheer concentration of talent that came out of that one early team is staggering. Elon Musk went on to build SpaceX and Tesla. Reid Hoffman founded LinkedIn. Other members founded YouTube, Yelp, and Palantir.
They didn't just stumble into success. They were forged in a highly specific culture that transcended mere corporate professionalism. They weren't just showing up, swiping a badge, and checking boxes.
Startups should make their early staff as personally similar as possible. They need to work at breakneck speed, which requires an implicit, shared understanding of the world. At PayPal, they were all the exact same kind of nerd.
They all loved the capitalist, rugged, individualist universe of Star Wars far more than the communist, post-scarcity utopia of Star Trek. They were all deeply obsessed with creating a digital currency outside the control of central governments.
But here is where most people get tripped up.
Yeah, let me interrupt because that sounds like a recipe for a massive, catastrophic echo chamber. If everyone is the exact same kind of nerd, reading the same sci-fi books and sharing the same political philosophy, who is going to point out when they are collectively driving the company off a cliff? How do you avoid total groupthink?
It's a vital question. The balance is achieved through a ruthless internal division of labor. On the outside, to the rest of the world, the company presents a highly unified, cohesive front.
But on the inside, every individual must be sharply distinguished by their specific work. The best management strategy for an early-stage startup is to make every single person responsible for doing exactly one unique thing.
One unique thing. So, no overlapping responsibilities. None. By defining roles that narrowly, you completely eliminate internal competition for status and responsibility.
Internal conflict is like an autoimmune disease. It is what actually kills most startups long before outside competitors even get a chance to take a swing at them.
When two smart people are assigned the same vague domain, they spend all their energy fighting each other instead of building the product. By making everyone structurally unique on the inside, you can afford to be culturally cohesive on the outside.
It's wild to think about, but the best startups are basically mild cults. Think about it. A cult demands intense devotion, it separates you from the normal world, and it revolves around a central unifying belief.
The only difference is that a traditional cult is fanatically wrong about the nature of reality. A successful startup is fanatically right about a secret the rest of the world has missed.
But having a cult-like devotion and a brilliantly engineered product is still only half the battle. A great product does not sell itself. You have to engage with the outside world. Which brings us to the deeply misunderstood realm of sales, distribution, and the interaction between humans and machines.
Nerds absolutely hate sales.
Mm.
Engineers want to believe in the field of dreams fallacy. If you build it, they will come. We want to believe that a mathematically superior product will magically distribute itself because the market is rational.
But the market is not purely rational. Distribution is just as critical as the product itself. If you look around your company and you don't see any salespeople, you are the salesperson.
Distribution strategies vary based on the price of the product. If you are selling a $20 app, you rely on viral marketing. But if you are selling complex multi-million-dollar software to governments and giant corporations, you are in the realm of complex sales.
Take Palantir, the data analytics company. They don't have traditional salesmen making cold calls. The CEO himself spends the majority of his month on the road, personally negotiating deals that range from $1 million to $100 million.
At that level of expenditure, the buyer demands to look the visionary in the eye. Ignoring distribution because it feels less pure than engineering is a fatal mistake.
And speaking of engineering, as we look to the future of products, there is this massive, paralyzing anxiety about computers replacing human jobs. But this framework argues that this fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what computers actually are.
Computers are complements to humans, not substitutes. It's crucial to distinguish between globalization and technology here. Globalization is substitution. An American factory worker is competing directly with a factory worker in Mexico for the exact same job, using the exact same resources.
But humans and computers are good at fundamentally different things. They don't compete.
Exactly.
Humans have intentionality. We can make complex, long-term plans. We can read a room, understand context, and navigate ambiguous moral situations.
But we are terrible at crunching millions of rows of data. Computers, on the other hand, are gods of data processing, but they lack even the basic judgment of a 4-year-old child. They don't have intentions.
And crucially, in the macroeconomic sense, computers do not demand physical resources.
Right.
A computer algorithm doesn't want to buy my house. It doesn't want to eat my food or drive a sports car or buy a beachfront villa in the south of France. It just needs a little electricity.
This realization saved PayPal. They were losing millions to credit card fraud. They tried to stop it by hiring human analysts, but the humans couldn't keep up with the volume. Then they tried to write pure algorithmic software to catch the fraud, but the Russian hackers just changed their tactics and outsmarted the rigid code.
So they built a man-machine symbiosis. The computer algorithms process the massive volume of transactions to flag suspicious patterns, doing what machines do best. Then, those flagged transactions were routed to human analysts who made the final, nuanced judgment call doing what humans do best.
That hybrid approach was so powerful it actually became the foundation for Palantir. So if you understand the right product, the right distribution, and the right symbiosis of technology, you are ready for the ultimate stress test.
Every single business must answer 7 critical questions. If you fail even one of these, you are in serious trouble. They are engineering, timing, monopoly, people, distribution, durability, and secret.
To truly understand the devastating power of these 7 questions, we shouldn't just list them. We need to look at what happens when an entire industry fails them simultaneously. We need to autopsy the multi-billion-dollar clean tech bubble of the 2000s.
Oh man, the clean tech bubble. Between 2006 and 2012, investors poured over $50 billion into alternative energy startups. Everyone thought it was the absolute next big thing. Solar panels, wind turbines, electric grids. It was supposed to save the world and make everyone rich.
Instead, it was a bloodbath. Dozens of massive companies went bankrupt. Why? Because they failed the 7 questions. Spectacularly. Let's walk through them. Question 1. Engineering. Did they have a 10x breakthrough?
No. They had marginal improvements. A company like Solyndra built cylindrical solar panels that were perhaps 20% more efficient in a laboratory setting, but they were incredibly expensive to manufacture and fragile in the real world.
A 20% improvement is not enough to overcome the massive switching costs of abandoning the existing fossil fuel grid. Question 2. Timing. Was it the right time?
Clean tech companies assumed the era of cheap fossil fuels was over. They timed their massive capital expenditures to a peak in oil prices, completely missing the fact that fracking technology was about to make natural gas cheaper than ever.
Question 3. Monopoly. This is where the Econ 101 brainwashing really destroyed them. Clean tech executives constantly bragged to investors that they were entering a $1 trillion global energy market.
Which is exactly the lie competitors tell. Bragging about $1 trillion market means you are entering a ruthlessly bloody ocean of competition. You are a tiny minnow fighting against ExxonMobil and state-backed Chinese coal plants. They didn't take Australia. They didn't start with a small, defensible niche. They tried to take on the entire global grid on day one.
Question 4. People. Did they have the right team? Most clean tech companies were run by non-technical executives in suits who were great at lobbying the government for grants, but terrible at actual engineering.
Question 5. Distribution. Did they have a way to deliver the product? Look at a company like Better Place. They had this grand vision for electric cars where instead of charging the battery, you would pull into a station and a robot would swap your depleted battery for a fresh one in 3 minutes.
They spent $800 million building this infrastructure.
Yeah.
But they completely forgot to make it easy for consumers to actually buy the cars that fit the stations. The distribution was a nightmare.
Question 6. Durability. Could they defend their market position a decade into the future? The answer was a resounding no. Companies like Evergreen Solar simply could not compete when the Chinese government decided to heavily subsidize their own solar manufacturing.
The American companies were wiped out by cheap foreign dumping because they lacked a defensible 10x advantage. And finally, question 7. The secret. Did they know something others didn't? No, they just believed the generic consensus that going green is good.
Now contrast that staggering list of failures with the one company from that era that succeeded, Tesla. Tesla nailed all 7 questions. They nailed the engineering question. Their battery technology was vastly superior.
They nailed the monopoly question. They didn't try to build a cheap electric car for everyone. They took Australia by building the Roadster, an incredibly expensive, high-performance sports car for a tiny niche of wealthy eco-enthusiasts. They dominated that tiny market before moving to luxury sedans and eventually mass-market cars.
They answered the distribution question by refusing to use traditional dealerships. They owned their own stores to tightly control the customer experience. But perhaps most brilliantly, they answered the secret question.
Yes. Tesla realized that the desire for clean tech was driven just as much by social status as it was by environmental concern. In the 2000s, driving a Prius was the ultimate virtue signal, but the car was famously ugly.
Tesla's secret was recognizing that if you make an electric car that looks cooler and accelerates faster than a Ferrari, people like Leonardo DiCaprio will eagerly ditch their Prius for a Tesla just to look cool while saving the planet.
This analysis of clean tech also exposes a highly dangerous modern concept, the myth of social entrepreneurship. During the bubble, entrepreneurs were blinded by the idea of doing well by doing good. They wanted the massive financial power of a corporation, but they also wanted the moral applause of a nonprofit charity.
And trying to combine ruthless corporate profit with warm and fuzzy philanthropic goodness usually results in a company that fails at both. The ambiguity of the word social is the problem. It leads to groupthink. Progress isn't actually held back by corporate greed, it's held back by sameness.
Doing something genuinely different, building a true 0-to-1 monopoly that advances human capability, is what is truly good for society, even if it doesn't sound like a charity pitch. And doing something genuinely different almost always requires someone who is genuinely different. Behind Tesla, behind Apple, behind these massive vertical leaps, there is usually a singular, highly unusual individual. This brings us to our final exploration, the founder's paradox.
If you look at human traits on a normal bell curve, most people sit comfortably in the middle. Some people are physically strong, some are weak, some are naturally charismatic, some are deeply disagreeable. But successful founders do not fit the normal distribution. They're often pushed out to the extreme tails of the curve simultaneously.
Exactly. A legendary founder can be incredibly charismatic and inspiring, yet simultaneously ruthless and disagreeable. They are the ultimate insider running a massive organization, and yet they view themselves as perennial outsiders fighting the system.
We demand our founders to be these mythological heroes. We want them to pull the sword from the stone. Because a unique, deeply weird founder can make authoritative decisions, inspire irrational loyalty, and plan ahead for 20 years in a way that an impersonal, faceless corporate bureaucracy simply cannot.
A bureaucracy can survive a long time, but its time horizons are short. They only care about the next quarter's earnings report to appease the board. A visionary founder is looking decades down the line. They resemble feudal monarchs more than modern middle managers.
But placing this much reliance on a singular vision is incredibly dangerous. The single greatest danger is for a founder to become so certain of their own myth, so surrounded by their own success, that they lose their grip on reality.
And this is where we have to critique the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Rand wrote these massive novels praising the prime movers, these independent, godlike industrialists who were entirely self-sufficient.
Her heroes, like John Galt, believed they could just secede from society, move to a hidden valley, and the world would collapse without them. But that is a juvenile fantasy. No one is divinely self-sufficient.
A great founder's actual value isn't that they can do the engineering, the sales, and the design all alone in a cave. Their unique value is their ability to bring out the absolute best work from everybody else around them. They are a catalyst. If they mistake their catalytic role for absolute supremacy, the company crumbles.
It is an incredible high-wire act. We absolutely need these unusual, extreme founders to lead us out of the stagnation of incrementalism. But the moment they stumble, society is brutally ready to tear them down, demonize them, and use them as scapegoats.
They have to wield immense power without mistaking the crowd's worship or the crowd's jeering for the truth. They have to stay grounded in the reality of their 0 to 1 secret. And that requires a level of self-awareness that is as rare as the secret itself.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We have gone on an absolute journey today. We started by looking at the stagnation of our physical world and the devastating limits of globalization without technology. We escaped the traumatizing dogmas of the 1990s dot-com crash, realizing that boldness and planning are virtues.
We shattered the Econ 101 illusion of perfect competition and learned to unabashedly embrace the pursuit of a monopoly. We explored the necessity of finding hidden secrets, rejecting the lottery ticket mentality of the modern resume, and respecting the brutal math of the power law.
We looked at how to build a rock-solid foundation, the symbiosis of humans and machines, and the 7 critical questions that separate the Teslas from the bankrupt clean tech failures. To contextualize why all of this matters on a civilizational level, the philosopher Nick Bostrom outlines 4 possible patterns for the future of humanity.
The first is recurrent collapse, the ancient belief that history is just a never-ending cycle of prosperity followed by devastating ruin. The second is a global plateau, where developing nations catch up to the West, but the brutal competition for scarce resources eventually leads to a stagnant zero-sum conflict.
The third option, tragically, is extinction. But the fourth option, and the only one that represents a truly better future for our descendants, is a radical takeoff towards something entirely new, driven by new technology.
It is sometimes called the singularity. It is the ultimate 0 to 1 leap.
And whether or not we achieve some cosmic singularity, the choice between nothing and something rests on what we do right now. The ancients believed history was just a wheel turning endlessly. But the truth is, every great moment in business and in history happens only once. The next Bill Gates will not build an operating system. The next Mark Zuckerberg will not build a social network. If you are copying them, you aren't learning from them. So I want to leave you with a question to mull over as you go about your day. Look closely at your own career, your own projects. What is the uniquely singular thing in your life that you are currently treating as a safe, predictable copy-paste exercise when you should actually be daring to build it from 0 to 1? The blueprint they handed you is useless. The future is completely unwritten. The choice between creating a monopoly or disappearing to the crowd is entirely up to you.